Here is my LEGO Technic compact mobile crane, built for Eurobricks contest TC22. For this contest we had to build some kind of construction equipment, but it had to be small enough to fit inside a box with dimensions of 10,000 cubic studs. So in the end mine is 48 studs long, 13 studs wide, and 16 studs tall, I believe. So I just fit in that. So I've been able to put in quite a few functions, but as usual, it's got the cost of poor reliability because there's so many in there. So the functions I have are a two-stage extending boom, run off this crank back here, a lifting boom using these linear actuators, also off this exact same knob, because I've got, I've got a two-output gearbox that is shifted from the bottom and has the outputs on the top. That's kind of interesting. And then I've got boom rotation from this knob here, winch from this knob, outrigger extension and lowering from these two coupled knobs, and then steering from the steering wheel. So I'll demonstrate those now. So the steering's pretty simple. We just got a wheel in here that rotates these. Unfortunately, I did not find space to do four-wheel steering, but it's still got a pretty sharp lock, so it's still quite maneuverable. This wheel likes to fall off. So the Outriggers is one of my favorite functions, controlled by these two knobs linked together just for convenience and symmetry. So it extends all four, and then also lowers the legs automatically. So basically, because of this sliding part here, just a sec. Oops. At some point it's forced to pull up the leg when it gets there, and at some point it has to lower it. It doesn't have to be right away. So if I bring them out, if this had stayed up, then this stop here would be at the end of the travel, so when I continue cranking the rack, it's forced to pull down the leg. So the legs don't really offer a lot of stability, but they do help, especially if you manually just kind of pull them up like that. But they look really cool. I'm very pleased with how I was able to get that all into such a small space. So a typical problem with construction equipment and mobile cranes is trying to get a bunch of functions through one turntable, especially when they're remote controlled and you want all the motors to be on one side of the turntable. So for me, I thought it would be a pretty nice feature to have all the control knobs right at the back here for all the crane functions. So I didn't really want to have any actually on the superstructure. But the issue with that is that you have to get three functions through the turntable, which are going to be the lifting, the extending, and the winch. And well, there have been some proof of concepts to do that in LEGO. They are just extremely impractical. Really two is as far as you can go. So as a compromise, I came up with this interesting gearbox mechanism, which I'm going to show here. So anyways, the first function through the turntable, the winch, is really simple. It's just this gear runs this, which runs an axle all the way through to the winch. But the other two are more complicated. So they run from this knob here, which runs that tan gear, which is eventually hooked up to this blue, or no, it's hooked up to some 8-tooth gears on this axle here. Two of them. So they both run this blue 22 gear, which you can just see in there. So I'm moving it up and down by moving my gear selector, but it's always driven. So at the same time, I'm not just pushing that gear, it's got a driving ring on the other side of it, and then another blue 22 gear, so that goes all the way up into the superstructure. You can't really see it, but then, depending on whether it's up or down, the upper 22 gear will mesh with either one of two functions. Hopefully I'll get a little mock-up going so I can show you after this here. But anyways, that's how it works. It's controlled using this here, just pushing it up and down. Then it's got a spring-loaded part on the top to force it to push back down with this. Okay, so here's a mock-up of how that gearbox works. This axle down here would be on the chassis, and these up here would be on the superstructure. And these here would be attached to each other by the turntable, so the top and the bottom can rotate relative to each other. So when I'm in the one gear, rotate this, and it runs the driving rings and rotates the light gray gear. Then if I slide it up to the other side, it'll run the black gear. So if these are on their own axles, then I have two different outputs, plus the one through the middle, all controlled from the base. So I thought that was a pretty cool little function to add in there. So the next function I'll show is the winch. It's controlled by this knob here, which runs some gears and axles and stuff, and a worm gear, which then runs those light gray gears, sends the axle up the middle of the turntable, right to that spool right there. So it is directly under the boom. I really didn't have anywhere else to put it. I couldn't really drive it from anywhere else, or even use a bigger one. Fortunately, I'm using a dental floss for my string, which is very small, and I can fit a lot of it on that little spool. So then it has to go through a fair bit of, like, it goes through the small hole on that transmission driving ring lever, then through some other stuff, up through the little hole on this minifigure pistol part, up through there, then down through to here. So instead of doing a hook, I needed to have some weight on here to counteract all of those turns it has to do. And I don't have any of the Lego weighted hooks, so what I did is I used these classic 90s magnet parts, which add enough weight for it to work correctly, and hook onto there, and then you can use it to pick up any kind of metal objects. Well, not heavy ones, but yeah. So I'll demonstrate that in a sec. I got it free of that other magnet, so now I can show it working. It's not very fast. I think I have too much reduction on it, but the worm gear is nice to keep it from getting away from me. A lot of other LEGO mobile cranes I've seen have the pulley down in the hook and then coming back up to here. So I originally had that, but it required a lot more weight than this because of the mechanical advantage involved. And when I've worked with mobile cranes in real life, they've never actually had that pulley, so I mean, it's probably just the jobs I was doing, but I was happy to have it this way. So the boom extension on this is both the place where I was most ambitious and the place where I ended up being most disappointed. So it's supposed to be run from this knob through the gearbox, but it takes an awful lot of effort to actually extend it, and there's at least one spot in the gearing here that isn't particularly strong and really can't be reinforced because of the way the gearbox is built. So if you try to crank it from the knob down here, it's just gonna skip and also take crazy amounts of effort. Well, it is actually moving, but I'm sure at some point it'll skip and takes all that effort. Running it just by pushing this gear up here works okay, and if you use the other hand on the other knob, you'll get it out there eventually. So it's running this worm gear, which runs the racks on this middle dark bluish gray part, and then hopefully at some point, yeah, now the pulleys are kicking in. So now the second stage, constructed of system plates, starting to come out. I think I'm going to actually attach a motor. I'm going to pull out this axle, put in a longer one, and just attach a motor for demonstration purposes, because it takes a painfully long time to extend by hand. And I've never actually done it. I've given up much sooner than that. So I'll be back in a sec. Got just random thrown together motor here. Now you can watch it extending without me having to do much work. But I think it could be done by hand. It's just not fun. So I chose to do the system plates for here because I had to fit in this 1x2 space, and the only really studless option I could think of was just a beam on top of another set of beams, and that I did not find to be very strong in the direction I needed it to be. So went with this instead. It's still not great. It can bend a lot from side to side. Oops, motor pops off. But for pretty small manual model like this, I think it's just enough. A larger crane should probably at least have a 2-stud wide boom at the end. Okay. Getting close to full extension, but not quite. And that's as far as it should go. So, it's quite a long boom. Pretty happy about that. So now for lifting the boom. Normally I realize you'd probably lift the boom first and then extend it, but extending the boom is already very hard, and if it had to lift its own weight at the same time, it just gets even worse. So, anyways, for that we gotta switch the gearbox down here. And then, I'm not sure which direction I crank it. Yeah. So, it starts... pull it back so I can get a better grip on it. Starts lifting. I'm honestly really surprised it can do it with the boom out this far without skipping those gears, but it is still a lot of effort to do it from here. It's much easier to just grab this gear here and do it, so that's what I'm going to do the rest of the way. And as you can see, the rear wheels have left the ground. Probably another reason you don't lift it once the boom is already extended. It should stabilize once I get it up. So, here it is at full lift. It's a very tall crane like this. I'm pretty pleased about that. So yeah. So my model can get very big. It does fit inside our 10,000 cubic stud limit when it's all retracted, but I think if they gave out a prize for the model that could exceed it by the most, mine would likely win, especially with the boom rotated at some other angle. So the last function I have to show is the superstructure rotation. So I didn't show that before because my thing has an issue where, because I didn't put the pivot right at the back, when this is up, it kind of pulls down like this. And then because it's there, it'll run into all this stuff here when I try to rotate it. So that is an issue. So it's controlled by this knob here. Just get it over its stops here. Just runs on a worm gear and a 56 tooth. I don't remember. Maybe it is a 60 tooth. One of the large turntables. Can't even remember which. So, it should be capable of a full 360 degrees of rotation. But, anyways, pretty simple function. But an important one for sure. Overall, I do like the model. It looks pretty interesting, I think, with the red and black. Got a lot of interesting functions I haven't really done before, and yeah, it's just a very different model from what I usually build. I think because of that it had some issues, mainly with operating it, having to crank too much, and then the boom being just weak, or taking too much effort. But yeah, I got to do some interesting solutions that I hadn't done before. This is the first time I've designed a 2-stage boom, so that was fun. I really liked the way I got the distribution gearbox going inside the turntable, and the outriggers were really satisfying as well. So, yeah, I'm happy with this.